Today's class is a continuation of accounting ratios. First of all, we can deal with one problem. In this problem, we had to calculate debt equity ratio, total assets to debt ratio, property ratio, and debt to capital employed ratio. We have given one balance sheet, then shareholders funds. Here it is given as share capital reserves and surplus, non-current liabilities, long-term borrowings, current liabilities, non-current assets, and current assets. First of all, we can calculate the debt equity ratio. Debt equity ratio, the equation for this is debt divided by equity. Debt consists of all the long-term loans of the business, long-term liabilities of the business. So here we can see that under the non-current liabilities, long-term borrowings is given. There is a debt. It's long-term borrowings or long-term loans also that all come under the debt. So long-term we write it as debt is equal to long-term borrowings. The amount for this one is 1,50,000. Then we have to calculate equity. Equity is also known as shareholders funds. Then what are the equities given here? Share capital and reserves and surplus. So equity consists of share capital plus reserves and surplus. The amount we have written 4 lakh plus 1 lakh. Total amount we can get as 5 lakhs. Then coming into equation, debt equity ratio is equal to the amount is what? 1,50,000 divided by equity. We have counted it as 5 lakhs. Then when we divide it, we can get the answer as 0.3. So since it is a ratio, we express it as 0.3:1. Then next we have to find the total assets to debt ratio. The equation for this is total assets divided by long-term debts. Total assets from the balance sheet, we can see that fixed assets, it's a total of fixed assets plus non-current investments plus current assets. So 4 plus 1 plus 2, what is that? 7 lakh is the total assets amount. Then long-term debts. Long-term debts, we have earlier calculated the debt in the debt equity ratio. The debt amount, that is 1,50,000. Then by dividing it, by cutting the zeros, first of all we cut the zeros here, then 70 divided by 15, we simplify that one and we can get this amount as 4.61. Since it is expressed as ratio, then it is written as 4.67:1. Then we have to calculate the proprietary ratio. Proprietary ratio, the equation is shareholders funds divided by total assets. As I have said earlier, shareholders funds and both equity are the same. We have calculated equity, the amount is 5 lakhs. Total assets also we have calculated amount which is 7 lakhs. By dividing it, we can get the amount as 0.71. So the answer is written as 0.71:1. Then next we have to calculate the debt to capital employed ratio. So equation is long-term debt divided by capital employed. Long-term debt earlier we have calculated. Then capital employed is equal to shareholders funds and the long-term borrowings. So here the shareholders funds we have calculated as 5 lakhs, then the long-term borrowings is 1,50,000. So the total amount becomes 6,50,000. Then inserting it in the equation, we can write it as 1,50,000 divided by 6,50,000. So the amount we get as 0.21. So answer will be 0.21:1. The next ratio we have to study is the interest coverage ratio. Interest coverage ratio shows the relationship between the net profit before interest and tax divided by net profit before interest and tax and the interest on long term debts. Net profit before interest and tax means the profit that we have got before the payment of interest and tax, then and the interest on the long term debt. Then our next category of ratios is, so far we have discussed about the solvency ratios. We have discussed about the solvency ratios, debt equity ratios, debt to capital employed, all these we have discussed. Now we are going to discuss about the activity ratios. Activity ratios, also known as turnover ratios or efficiency ratios, it shows the efficiency of a firm. Then it includes inventory turnover ratio, trade receivable turnover ratio, trade payable turnover ratio, investments or net assets turnover, and fixed assets turnover, and working capital turnover ratio. First is inventory turnover ratio. Inventory turnover ratio shows the relationship between the cost of revenue from operations and the average inventory. Revenues from the operations of the business, cost of revenues, cost for earning the revenue for operations of the business, the average inventory. Average inventory is the equation for this one is opening stock plus closing stock divided by 2. Then comes the trade receivable turnover ratio. Trade receivable turnover ratio shows the relationship between the net credit revenue from operations, no cash revenue, credit revenue from operations, divided by average trade receivable. Average trade receivable is equal to opening debtors. Trade receivable consists of debtors and bills receivable. Since it is average trade receivable, we take into consideration all the opening and the closing amounts. So first we add the opening amounts, that is opening debtors plus opening bills receivable plus closing debtors and bills receivable divided by 2. That's all for today's class. Thank you.